Again, I understand the frustration. I understand everything that kind of goes into that. Moving forward, I just want to focus on football.
Deshaun Watson today apologizing, I think, for his comments after the game against the Bills. You know, I was going to say, like, I'm no Deshaun Watson fan, like, who is? But I kind of, in a way, respect it when a player sticks up for himself after a game. And you know what? You're not helping me. I mean, booing is what you get. I said already that the Browns coach made that point, and it's the right point. We all signed up for this super high-profile existence. When we suck, guess what's going to happen? But it still doesn't mean anybody really should ever do it. Like, Watson is almost like an extreme, I think he is an extreme example, because you might have just hated your favorite team for trading for him. I mean, deeply rooted stuff. But you also know that what is your team there for? It's not to win community service awards, it's to win games. And that's what you love about them, is when they win games. I know I'm not speaking for everybody, but that's kind of what most people make it about, is the performance on the field. So you could always say about the Browns, as much as they would have known how bad a look it was, I mean, geez, we haven't had a good quarterback in forever. Here's a chance to get one. He's damaged goods, but still, like, we'll take that chance. And I'm sure they were thinking that in a year or two, maybe even less than two, that he would just sort of, they could roll out Deshaun Watson and have a contending team. And obviously that didn't happen. And as time goes on and you watch him struggle so badly, it just makes it all feel and look worse and worse. But, you know, even though his team is going to want him, as I'm sure happened here, his team is going to want him to publicly apologize and try to redefine what he was actually trying to say on Saturday after that game. At least he was willing to say, like, yeah, this is the same fan base that cheered when I got hurt. So can't say I'm that surprised. And, you know, you're always going to see, almost always going to see players walk that back because the team is going to make them do it. But I doubt, I mean, heat of the moment, I doubt he wasn't speaking from, like, real emotion when he said what he said on Saturday. Well, that's it for the Bills and the Browns for this year, probably, right? I mean, imagine a Browns playoff team. That would pay pretty well if you were to hit on that. And so Cleveland is, they're in the rear view mirror here. The Bills look forward to Houston, if not Pittsburgh, first in this preseason finale. I wanted to bring up, as I said a few minutes ago, James Cook. And, he's always interesting to talk about. He's been so good for the Bills. I especially like, not looking for extra credit, I especially like bringing him up because I was never that into James Cook. And then he went and has set records the last couple of years. And as a fantasy player, that's happened on a team with Josh Allen rushing still for double-digit touchdowns every year, which is insane. So all the credit to Cook. He's been durable. He's been very good. Imagine if he ever got their trust on third down, what kind of numbers that would all be. I still think any team can withstand a running back injury. And now here you have the Raiders with or should be able to, I should say. Now you have the Raiders with Ashton Genty, and that's really sort of a tough example to use because they haven't been good at all. So what happens if they don't have Ashton Genty? I mean, probably the worst case scenario is what it's already been for the Raiders. The guy behind him, as it happens, has looked great, apparently, in the preseason, and this is Mike Washington, who was at UB before, where do you go, Louisville, Washington, is that right? Arkansas. Thank you. After leaving UB. But, some ties to the area, if you will, and it looks like sounds like he's been tremendous for them. we'll see. Genty, they have the Dolphins in week 1, the Raiders. And I'm sure they're hoping for some kind of real step forward. New coach, new quarterback, first overall pick, and Genty and Bauer still young. But this is a blow. I just don't think it has to really affect their wins and losses, which is always I always love it, the fun debate when you have running backs who end up hurt. Not that, injuries are fun per se, but all right, what happens to the 49ers if they lose McCaffrey? What happens to the Ravens if they lose Henry? What happens to the Bills if they lose James Cook? Not something you really want to think about, but these kinds of things happen in the NFL. And I just wouldn't want to predict that they would really suffer, because there's somebody else who can go in and do, I think, mostly the same job. Not always true. 803-0550 is the number. Let's go to Tom here. Hi, Tom.
Mike, thanks for having me. Calling from Webster, New York, where life is still worth living. I know you used to be out this way.
Yes.
So just really quickly, 2 preseason games we've seen now with Joe Brady at the helm. Just wanted to get your thoughts on how have you felt about his presentation so far? Does it seem like he's up for the task as far as what we can tell? And also just the second part of my question is, just kind of think about what our expectations are for the season. What's the more likely scenario come January or February, where do we look back and say, man, we've missed McDermott, or do we look back and say, maybe we should have moved on a little sooner because of how well Joe Brady has done? Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, I like that you used the word presentation in the first part of your question, because I think that's almost all that has mattered so far. I mean, just like the games itself or practices themselves, you have an injury, then the only news is bad news in the preseason, because for the most part, the games are kind of a lie. You're not really running game plans out there. You're not really playing against starters necessarily. I think it can be bad if it's like what the Browns just suffered through, when you are running your starters out against mostly backups, and it looks like that. I think this is a really bad sign, by the way, for Tennessee so far. But here, that was really never going to happen. Presentation, I think you've got to give Brady good marks. I mean, what has there been? We're all looking for it, right? Maybe I'm not thinking of something, but what has there been that has been sort of a story for the wrong reasons? I don't know, nothing. There was the matter of playing Josh Allen in the first game, but as I keep saying it this way, they got away with it. And so, how much effort do you want to spend banging on them for that? So I think, so far, so good. After the season, well, who knows? It's really hard to know what we're going to feel and talk about when it's so far off. And, here's what I mean. If you take the last, in all these years with the Bills and their regular season performance, which has been A+, and then their playoff results, which have been disappointing ultimately, we haven't really been able to agree on what was to blame for that. Last year's a perfect example. We had Kansas City losses. I mean, there have been 4, where even like in this room, Bulldog and I have often been sort of different in what we think the culprit was for their losses. And, what was Denver? Denver scored 33 points. The Bills turned the ball over, 5 times in that game? Who's to blame? And then when you take that a step further and try to figure out what the coach's culpability is in that, then that gets even tougher. I think the McDermott thing is all very reasonable, that he was a huge success coming in as an assistant coach 9 years ago, putting down a regular season record of 98-50, helping to turn the Bills from a losers lose team to a team where now it's like 180 degrees different, where you get the benefit of the doubt. You might get free agents. You might get sort of that, have that expectation where, people think you're going to win. They're the betting favorite in the division. Again, they're the AFC Super Bowl favorite. Again, His departure didn't change that, but he established that. He was the head coach, and he put that into motion and then rode that for, a really good 9-year run. Having said that, in the playoffs, each time he had the finger pointed at him. And I think Denver is that too, even with 5 turnovers on offense. That was game day decisions, that's earlier on in his tenure than more recently. But without overthinking it, when you lose in the playoffs on a streak like the Bills have, the coach is always going to be, scrutinized. And for a team like the Bills did to become exhausted by these losses to the point of making that change, it's kind of normal. I don't know what we're going to talk about, though, this time, because we have to see first how it ends, and if it's like it's been the last few years, we might not even agree on, what kind of blame the head coach deserves for it. So I don't blame the Bills for making the move. I think it's interesting and even kind of strange that they stayed with Brady in this, but it also, you can understand it from a standpoint of how much not only they themselves have valued and appreciated their continuity, but everybody outside says the same thing. Wouldn't you like to be like that, where you run back the same head coach and quarterback and GM and even coordinators sometimes year after year? Wouldn't you like to be like that? So now you decide that you're done with the head coach. Well, GM stays, offensive coordinator comes up, quarterback, of course, stays, and we'll see where that takes us. I think, without being able to predict the playoffs right now, and I'm really am not inclined to make any effort to do that. What I think, as I've talked about a lot, especially since Bulldog left us 3 months ago to go on vacation, is just how interesting the conference dynamic is, and how many more teams than before seem viable as a team that could be the 1 seed. I think there are like 7 or 8. And last year I wouldn't have said that, but then somebody from outside got it with Denver. But it had been Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore, then maybe 1 or 2 other teams, depending on their schedules, what New England did last year. You would have liked to think that the Bills would have had that season, and they didn't get to the 1, but they got to the 2, home game, first round. Didn't happen. Thanks, Tom. We've got Sal coming up in less than 20 minutes. Bulldog is off today. He and I are both off tomorrow. This has never been allowed. There must be something really important tomorrow because we're both off. And then Wednesday is me. Is he here on? I'm not even going to try this time. I was wrong all week. Is he back on Wednesday?
I believe he is back on Wednesday.
All right. I'll make sure he knows that you expect that I'll go with you on this, that we expect him back on Wednesday. And then I'm off for a road trip here for the rest of the week. So now you know that. Hopefully it's right. 803-05.